this research is organized to disseminate findings. We had a randomized controlled trial of a new maize seed variety, and what the project was all about is that a new maize seed variety was developed for mid-altitude areas. Why mid-altitude areas is because the big monopolies in the seed market had ignored this market, and we had a private seed company that put in investment, developed a seed variety that was specifically targeted for that market. So the varieties are not to be planted in the traditional maize growing areas, but rather for farmers growing maize in the altitude area. So we did a randomized controlled trial, and we were tracking how farmers adapt, what are the constraints that farmers go through adapting to these varieties, and then what are the impacts from adaptation. We see a difference between farmers who adapt and also give feedback for promotion of private seed companies in developing seed varieties and penetrating the market. One of the challenges is that having the government control a large share of the seed market, we've only had very few private seed companies. The current seed market is controlled by the government, the public institution, and multinational organizations. So we have the Monsantos, Gentas, and all that. So this was a good feedback that we can have private seed companies being competitive in the maize seed market. One of the things that we kind of highlight is, one, how do farmers adapt? How do farmers get to learn about new varieties? So that has a big impact on extension systems. So extension is one of the ways of taking these messages to farmers, informing them about the availability and how to use these technologies. As you all know, currently extension has been developed. It's purely a function of the county government, and since we evolved, we really suffered actually in terms of extension. We've actually gone some few steps back. So one of the policies is that, of course, there is need to strengthen extension and also bridge the gap between research and extension. So as people are developing new seed varieties, we need this person who is the extension officer to take it to the farmers. So he acts as a bridge between the research and the farmers. So if extension is not working, definitely we have challenges on how farmers get to learn new seed varieties. The second implication, of course, is about not just seed but also fertilizer. So as we are promoting use of fertilizer, how are farmers using this fertilizer and what are they using it for? What we are showing is that farmers who just do seed only, of course they just get minimal increases. For you to get best increases, you need to use hybrid seeds and fertilizer. So if you're just using hybrid seed only, then you're not going to benefit. Importantly is that over the last couple of years, we've had some instances where the government has given seed subsidy. But we know that seed subsidy and fertilizer subsidy are done separately. We are showing also that it's important for the government to rethink this, and if it's offered as a package, then it has more impact for production and productivity. If you look at the objective of the ministry usually talks about reducing the cost of production. Here we are talking about rather than not just reducing the cost of production, but how do you get farmers to maximize the benefits from adapting new seeds technologies. So rather than one of the things that we've been saying from those particular studies, and I think we've been consistent on this, is that we don't need to just give fertilizer for the sake of giving fertilizer. It has to be targeted. We have to know what is the objective of this. So we know, and we're also showing even in this study, that fertilizer use is still low. Even though the number of percentage of farmers using fertilizer has increased slightly, probably because of the fertilizer. If you look at the intensity of fertilizer, we are still doing around 60 out of 200, which is slightly above a third of the recommended use. So if you are to improve the returns to adoption and increase in fertilizer, you have to use it optimally. So currently we are seeing part of what could be constraining this production levels could be the suboptimal use of complementary inputs. So what we are seeing is that yes, farmers do adapt seed, but yes, a lot of farmers do adapt seed but do not use fertilizer. It really helps if we can be able to provide this as a package to farmers. One of the interesting things we did in the project was that we tried to relax these constraints, and we had a group of farmers who were given, in addition to being given seed, they were given fertilizers, and we are finding that their production went up by almost 3 times compared to those who are still using local seeds. The varieties are being introduced by independent people. Again, the motivation to want to track the adoption is on the onus of the person introducing it. We are happy that Western Seed has worked with us to try and track adoption and try to find a niche market for themselves. So in this case, we are talking about mid-altitude areas. They have been interested to get feedback from farmers, learning about what works. I mean, how do you get farmers to adapt? How do you release? I mean, how do you relax the constraints that farmers face in adoption? So this includes relaxing adoption, the credit constraints. We all know that most farmers, or most of the farmers, do not have adequate access to credit, because even though currently we are saying that the interest rates have gone down and all that, farmers still are credit rationed. You cannot go to a bank and say that I want to be a maize farmer without being asked for collateral. So also investing in or coming up with innovative financing options can also help improve adoption. But this of course is dependent on the players, and you need different people doing different roles. What we found is that cost for seed was not a problem, and how we show this is that for all the farmers who are adopting improved seeds, the intensity rate was up to the recommended. So the recommended planting rate for maize hybrids is between 8 to 10 kgs, and we find that almost all farmers who are adapting were actually planting within 8 and 10 kgs per acre. The big challenge was now when you look at the complementary inputs. So you find that now there's a big difference between different categories of farmers.
The conference today was titled Enhancing Smallholder Productivity, and looking at the findings from a randomized controlled trial on maize hybrids in Kenya. This is some work that has been done in partnership between Tegemeo Institute of Egerton University and the University of California, Davis, together with Western Seed Company, to which the RCT was based on, and support from other various stakeholders or partners, particularly Acumen Fund, USAID, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And really what we set out to do was to look at coming from a background of low adoption of maize hybrids in the mid-altitude areas, what we normally would call Western lowlands, Western transitional, also in central, Western mid-altitude areas. We find from our data and from what we've done in the past that the adoption of maize hybrids is low in that area, and hence also low productivity. We set out to understand that, and we wanted to look at varieties that are used in those regions. It's clear that some of the earlier investments on hybrid seed perhaps did not pay a lot of attention to those mid-altitude areas, and therefore there were no specialized hybrids that would suit that area. And therefore we looked at some varieties of Western Seed Company that are believed to do well in those areas, particularly the Western mid-altitude areas. And we wanted to look at how support or existence of a small seed company that would look at a niche area, special areas like the mid-altitude, whether it can survive and whether it can make impacts in terms of allowing farmers to adopt hybrids which can increase productivity and that can change their lives. And yes, we do find clearly that the hybrids that are out there by Western Seed in the mid-altitudes have a potential to, if adopted, to increase productivity and household welfare. So there is indeed the question of scale, whether that's scalable and whether such a venture can be profitable, because it needs numbers. So that's something that we would like to look at. But yes, by and large, that is there. Around that, we've also done several, we've looked at different other components in this research, looking at the complementarity of inputs that while yes, farmers can adopt maize hybrids to increase productivity, the adoption of technology, it's perhaps as a package. So there are complementary inputs, particularly for hybrid seed. Then you need fertilizer, and if fertilizer is not available, then yields are not as high as you would want. And so we looked at if liquidity constraints, which we believe are what keep the farmers from buying fertilizer, when they are relaxed, what does that have on adoption of both input and fertilizer? And we clearly see from the work that was done on bundles of technology that use of hybrid seed and fertilizer together does increase productivity by a large margin. And so not only the input in terms of seed, but also other complementary inputs. We also looked at soils. And conducted soil testing for our sample farmers and had recommendations. And so we're looking at, the information that was given to the farmers on the recommendations for their soils. Did they change how they use fertilizer? And we do find, yes, it does have a bearing on how they decide on fertilizer. And so by and large, I think what we are looking at here, how can we increase our productivity for both food security and poverty reduction, or increase household income? And we do find that yes, there is potential to do that, yet there are myriad of challenges that prevent the attainment of the potential in productivity. And the big question that arose from the discussion is that yes, while there are so many hybrids out there, 250, how come that as a country we haven't been able to increase maize productivity that low? And clearly there are issues, like I've said, of soils. There are issues of management practices, which are as important as the technology. There are issues of information. How do farmers get information about the existence of certain new hybrids? There's issues of trust. Farmers want technologies that they have known for many years. They have the history. They know how they perform. And therefore, this calls for more work on breeders to identify certain traits, in addition to the genetics, but certain traits that are very important to the farmers to increase adoption.
So we've had today a very exciting conference reporting back on a research project that we've undertaken together with Tegemeo Institute. I think if I summed it up, I would say that what we learned today is that one of the largest barriers to improved productivity among smallholders in different parts of Kenya is heterogeneity. Soils are different, people are different, altitudes are different, weather patterns are different. So we started off looking at what difference did it make if a seed company bred varieties for a rather specific, somewhat unique environment. And could that really make a difference if you made those seeds available? And the answer is yes. We found they made quite a bit of difference for the farmers who were given access to these seeds. Their incomes increased, their productivities increased, and so having something that spoke to that basic agricultural heterogeneity in soils and altitudes makes a difference. I think the challenge now is to figure out a seed system that can profitably and sustainably deliver that kind of finely tuned seeds. Another thing we learned today is that farmers are really quite different in their ability to purchase not just seeds, but the technologies and the other inputs such as fertilizer that really make those seeds pay off. And we found that farmers who are better resourced benefited even more from these finely tuned seeds. Others benefited some, but much less. So again, there's another challenge there of looking across a small farm population. They, from a perspective of a California farm, which are very large, very capital intensive, they all look the same. They look tiny by California standards. But there's a lot of heterogeneity there in terms of financial capacity. Another heterogeneity we explored today was in soils. And it's not just that the soil is different in one county of Kenya than it is in another county of Kenya, but even within the same village, the soils can be quite different. Now, this has several implications. Perhaps the most interesting one is evidence we found that when soils are very heterogeneous within a village, individuals, farmers, have trouble learning from each other, which makes sense, because what happens on my farm or what happens on your farm could be very, very different, because your soils are good, your soils respond to new technologies, my soils are bad, they don't respond to good technology, and it turns out farmers already appreciate that. And this has very large implications for how we disseminate information. As economists, we like to say people often learn from themselves and they can learn from others. But when there's this strong heterogeneity in soils, it becomes extremely difficult to learn from others. And therefore, extension techniques, information sharing has to become much more individualized and therefore more expensive, so until we find at least a better way to do it. The final challenge also comes from this kind of soil heterogeneity, is even again within small areas, the kinds of fertilizers that one farmer in a community might need could be very different than what his neighbor does. And the problem is, when you are a small farmer and you're cultivating an acre of maize or perhaps even less, if you want a very specific kind of fertilizer, you don't have the scale to order and get what you want. And in making matters worse, you might say, well, why doesn't everyone in the community get together and bundle their demand? And that sounds like a great idea, but when you have this overwhelming heterogeneity, that starts to become difficult. So what I need for my soils, which are acidic and are zinc deficient, and what you need for your soils, which are not acidic and actually need nitrogen, we can't really bundle our orders in the same way. So it's great that we've learned about this heterogeneity. There was a lot of creativity on how you can solve it, and we heard from a number of agriculture department people, NGO people, all of whom have ideas about how we might begin to address these. But I think we've learned a lot, we've documented things, and so we will continue on and try to solve this puzzle.
The results I presented today were sort of offshoots from that project, related both to sort of how farmers learn about new varieties from each other and from their neighbors, as well as something related to input return. So how much more maize you get from an additional kilo of nitrogen, depending on what soil quality you have. And soil quality sort of runs as a theme in both of these presentations that I gave. One, in the social learning part, has to do with the fact that if soils are really variable in villages, then it becomes really hard for a farmer to look at his neighbor and say, the hybrid did really well on this person's field, now I can assume that it's going to work really well on my field, because if our fields are actually quite different, then maybe the hybrid won't work so well on my field, right? So that's the main idea, that in villages where soil quality is more heterogeneous, it becomes harder for farmers to learn from each other. And so they have to rely more and more on their own experiences rather than being able to take information from the whole group and from all the people that they know. So that's, I think, a big takeaway, that in villages where fields are really similar, we can get a bigger bang for the buck by sort of giving seeds to maybe just a few people, they'll tell their friends, everyone will adopt, it'll be fine. But in other contexts, you might really need to encourage individual learning and individual experimentation, so maybe by supplying more of these sample packs, making it easy for farmers to do small experimentation on their fields, rather than investing in a whole 2 kg bag or 10 kgs for an acre. Smaller packs makes it easier to try it out, right? The other thing was related to also soil quality heterogeneity, but how that affects fertilizer returns. And so we see that the amount of maize that you get for applying 1 more kilo of nitrogen Overall, in Western Kenya, it's quite low. It's a little higher in Central Kenya, but overall, it's quite low. And we find really big differences, sort of depending on the soil quality. So for very acidic soils, it doesn't matter how much nitrogen you throw on there; you're still not going to get a good crop. Similar patterns emerge for organic matter, like you at the extreme, so very low and very high organic matter. You actually don't get that much more out of nitrogen, etc. So there's all these different soil quality variabilities that affect the type of recommendation you want to give to a farmer for what fertilizer to apply, how much, etc. And finally, we also find really big differences in the quality of inputs. So we also provided fertilizer directly to farmers from MEA. They made us custom blends, and we brought that directly to the farmers. The returns to using that fertilizer is much higher than the fertilizer that farmers buy in the stores. And now we don't know whether that's because the agrovets are diluting the input or because MEA had some micronutrients that the other fertilizers don't. But either way, the returns are much higher when you use this high quality custom blends of fertilizer. I also have a study that looks at hybrid seeds. We went around and sampled hybrid seeds in local stores, and we find that we're still doing DNA testing. So we're going to compare the DNA of those hybrids to the seeds that we bought directly from the company of the same variety, to be able to see whether they're counterfeit or not. Because there isn't really a lot of quantitative evidence on counterfeiting. The other thing that we have done that we have results on is germination, and we find that only 76% of seeds germinate, as opposed to the 95% that it should be for certified seeds. And so we don't know whether that's because there's poor storage. But the really big takeaway from that is that in terms of policy recommendations, if it's counterfeiting, then we need to have the police out there. We need to have verification, right? That's a stick. We need to whip out the stick and wave it in front of some people. But if the problem is just that the seeds are stored poorly, then in fact we need to educate people, right? We might just need to educate them and say, listen, here's how you have to store the seeds. They need to be in dry environments, etc. So very, very different policy implications depending on what the DNA results tell us. So let's see. You'll have to stay tuned for the final results. But in general, I think we have to take into account both the environmental heterogeneity and the sort of institutional heterogeneity that exists on the ground. So.
And today, I had the opportunity to talk a bit about new technologies we're using for data collection, in particular using mobile phones to contact farmers. Oftentimes we only have the opportunity to talk to farmers in person, face to face, one time per year. And thanks to our farmers having access to mobile phones in Kenya, it made it possible for us to talk to them 2 or 3 times a year, getting better information about their planting and harvesting, and be able to respond to any issues that were coming up with the study. So I think it's been a good opportunity among researchers and people working in agricultural development to talk about these advances today.